Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be having our weekly compilation of true scary stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories. Mom, Grandpa, and toddler me were driving through rural West Texas at dusk. Mom noticed the road looked like it was moving, and something was crunching under the tires. She asked what it was. He told her that she didn't want to know. She insisted. My grandpa turned on the bright lights to reveal that it was a tarantula migration. I used to be a wildlife biologist for the United States Forest Service. I have come across most things that live in the desert. I haven't been intimidated by most until the day that I was out doing invasive grass surveys, and a swarm of killer bees moved the hive, flew past my partner and me. It looked like a dark cloud floating above the ground and sounded like a prop jet. Hands down, the most scared I've been in nature. My body flashed with heat, and I was completely frozen. When bees move, they all surround the queen in flight. If they had picked up on us as a threat, allergic or not, they could have killed both of us, easily. The most scary thing that I've seen out in the sands is probably the Salton Sea. From a distance and overhead, it looks like any other refreshing lake or reservoir, an oasis in the desert sands. But it is landlocked with no outgoing river, so the salts and minerals just keep building up every year. You head toward the beach. There is a beach of sand and ancient crushed-up shells, and the blueness of the water gets darker and darker until you realize that the blueness is just the reflection of the sky, and the water itself is black as tar, and the smell like rotten fish and spoiled eggs. There's dead fish everywhere, and flies. You don't even want to get close to the water nowadays, but if you did swim in it, you would float, because the salt in it is so concentrated. The Salton Sea is a trip. I was looking on an old map and saw a huge body of water in Southern California. Weird that I had been living out there for a few years and had never heard of it, so I drove out there. Apparently, there used to be resorts and such out there at one time. It was eerie seeing all of the abandoned buildings and such, but everything was cool until I went to the edge of the lake. The sand was crunchy. I looked down and there was not sand, but millions of dead fish bones. Maybe even billions. The entire shore was nothing but bones from dead fish. I looked out at the water. No waves. And realized why it was like that. Algae blooms. Apparently, the farm runoff goes into the Salton Sea and provides nutrients for algae to grow, and they take up all the oxygen in the water and kill off most of the fish. Something did move out in the water at one point, but the ripples were muted very quickly. I left the area while in a weird mental state. Humans really messed up that area really badly. One night, my friends and I got to the desert for a 2-night camping trip. On the way there, we were hit by heavy rainfall. By the time we got into the desert, it was cool and damp. We ended up going for a walk in the dark, and at one point, my friend says I can hear a snake. I say to him it just sounds like the wind. So he opens the flashlight, and right next to his feet there's a Palestinian viper curled up in a defensive pose. The snake has orange eyes under the light. Needless to say, we were lucky that no one trampled on the snake. This might not sound so scary until you've seen it in person, but I was out camping in the desert, and some idiot in the campground left a large cooler of beer unlocked. Javelinas got into the cooler and proceeded to get drunk on the beer. Wild pigs are not the nicest creatures, and when they get drunk, they don't get happy drunk. They get angry drunk. They rampage through the campground, tearing apart everything they could find, squealing like tortured banshees. They all collapsed in a heap in the middle of the campground, passed out. It was a very scary 10 minutes. I went to a park in the desert at 3 a.m. to get away from the lights and to try and see a meteor shower. I found darkness, got out of my car, can't see a thing, looking for shooting stars when I hear it. Clop, clop, clop. It gets louder and more frequent. Panicked, I get back in my car, turn the headlights on, and suddenly there is what sounds like a scream. Wild horses. I am surrounded by wild horses. They're everywhere. I didn't know that I was scared of horses, but invisible horses at 3 a.m. really freaked me out. Once, on a remote dirt road in Joshua Tree, I saw a decomposing rattlesnake in the road, so I pulled over to inspect it. It was 3 to 4 feet long and had been dead perhaps a week, so it was pretty much intact to tell its story. The snake had been run over, and I found him with his neck turned sharply, biting his body. I was in Butte Valley a few months after the Death Valley Germans disappeared, and explored some of the places they went. It was a shame because there were 2 well-equipped cabins they passed less than an hour walk where they could thrive for months if necessary. In the other direction, the wash is soft and sandy, and walking it was like walking down an escalator on the few steep parts. It intersects the road eventually, and the lights of the distant town of Shoshone are visible along the canyon as well. Instead, it turned out they made a grueling hike over an extremely difficult mountain range, expecting to run into guards patrolling the remote military base they saw on a map. It's actually a seldom used bombing range, protected by remoteness and inaccessibility. It's really remote out there, and occasionally spooky at night by yourself. Also in that area was the cabin where Charles Manson hid and was finally captured. The bathroom cabinet he was found hidden in was tiny, like the size of a laundry hamper. It made me think of those pictures of a little kid managing to get stuck inside a claw machine. The next time I went through the area, someone had pried this out of the tiny bathroom, leaving nails and holes in the plaster. Sometime after this, the whole cabin was burnt down. Very anticlimactic as Wild West famous places go. I've explored many interesting but quite dangerous mine shafts. An old silver and borax mine in the Calico Mountains had 2 to 3 foot trunks as timbers, holding up the hanging wall where the ore was removed. Over time, the weight caused a few of these to crush and splinter in the middle. There were 3 rickety 20-foot tall ladders to a lower level, which had rails and a low 5-foot roof. One time, I was taking my young teen nephews out to a remote but well-known desert canyon for a weekend of quadding and exploring. A ragged woman was walking down the road, which was almost a mile from the canyon mouth to the paved road. Not in distress, but apparently grown bored with whatever party was happening in the hills, and going to hitch a ride back to Barstow, where the party favors are never running low. There was no room to drive around her, so I slowed down and stopped a distance away. She kept walking toward the motorhome at the same pace till she got to the bumper and stopped, staring at me with her ragged tweaker face. After a longish minute, when I was wondering if I was going to have to get out and move her so we could continue, she got this determined look and started marching around to the passenger side. As soon as she was clear of the front, I gunned it and drove off, before she could start trying the doors. It was the most unexpected place to encounter a stereotypical, opportunistic, urban junkie. The scariest thing that I've seen out in the sands would honestly probably be what I call to this day the Mirage Man. Note, I wasn't living there, but broke down there. I was somewhere in the California desert when my friend's car died. Neither of us had smartphones, and even then there was no guarantee that we would have a signal. My friend wanted to walk. I said it was a really bad idea. He insisted, and I really didn't want to be left alone for who know how long without water. We started to walk, and every so often we would look back in case a car went by. It was perhaps only an hour after that we started walking that we started noticing someone off in the distance that appeared to be following us. My friend asked me if I should turn around. I thought this was too strange. We were in the desert while the sun was up, basically in the middle of nowhere. Why would someone else be walking? My friend wasn't entirely convinced and suggested the person might have struck his car and was also walking into tow. I pointed out that we had been walking for an hour, and this was the first we had seen of him. It was too monumental of a coincidence that someone could hit a parked car on the side of the road and catch up to us this fast. Long story short, we keep walking, but that figure is closing the distance. We were getting genuinely creeped out. We quickened up our pace as much as we dared in the heat, and every glance back the man was getting closer and closer. Not exponentially so, but noticeable. We found a truck stop not far off, and moved just shy of a jog to sit down and get water from the vending machines. My friend kept watching, and pointed out the man was now holding steady and not getting any further away or closer. My friend asked a driver for a ride after calling his motor club to bail him out. Our eyes were on the man, still there. We got the gas and kept our eyes on the man in the distance. The driver didn't see him. The closer we got to the dead car, now the further the man seemed to be. We made it to the car, with our pursuer nowhere to be seen. Never saw it again. My friend thinks that it was death itself, and had we not gotten to the truck stop, then it would have gotten us. I live on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It gets to 115 plus in the summers, so I like to go on long walks by the moonlight, in the early hours of the morning, out in the desert. I was at least 6 miles outside of town when this happened. I know, it's not the smartest, but I kinda like being alone out there. It kind of makes me feel a little more alive in a primal way. It's difficult to describe the feeling. Anyway, a few weeks ago I was out there doing my thing when I hear a screeching noise, like an inhuman high-pitched whining scream that slowly increased in pitch and volume. The source was within 10 or 15 yards. I fumbled around to turn on my phone's flashlight just in time to see a something's leg disappear into the brush. It was like that scene in Signs in the Cornfield where Mel Gibson's character shines his light around just in time to see the alien's foot disappear into the corn. I don't know what it was. I assume it was a tweaker or something, because I can't think of any animals in the area that sound like that. If it was a human, though, they would have to have been scrambling on all fours to be able to disappear into the sagebrush like that. The scariest thing that's ever happened to me was the 7.3 Landers earthquake in 1992. We were only 2 miles from the epicenter. The experience was the scariest part, but seeing how much the road split, so much that we couldn't drive over it and had to turn around. Scariest event of my life. The sound was insane. We were in a one-room tiny cabin. It wakes us up. My friend's dad is yelling at us to take cover. It's so loud that we can't hear him, and he's only 15 feet away. We couldn't even stand up. The shaking was so violent. The sound was the loudest thing I've ever heard. After it stops, the front door is stuck and we can't open it. A neighbor came over and helped us get it open. We go outside and the surrounding valley is silent, with an eerie dust cloud hovering around the local vistas and boulder mountains. Basically small mountains that are piles of huge boulders. We pack up and get the heck out of there, and head home 3 hours away. We stop off the highway, which is between Palm Springs and the backside of Big Bear Mountain. We have a huge view of the mountain in the distance. Then a pretty big aftershock hits. Within seconds, the entire mountain becomes engulfed in a huge dust cloud from all the shaking. Later, we find out that huge boulders were being dislodged and bouncing down the mountain. We eventually got home. I had nightmares for a couple of months. I'd wake up screaming. I was only 15 at the time. I have PTSD from it to this day. I get so spooked if I even think that I feel the ground move. Even if it's a tiny earthquake, I have a panic attack and start crying. I was in the desert in southern Colorado, staying at the Great Sands Dunes National Park. There's a full view of the dunes from the campsites. It was really spectacular. I left my tent to go to the bathroom at maybe 10 p.m. It was summer, so hadn't been dark for very long. When I looked out towards the dunes, I saw what I can only describe as what looked like the circle of light that an old non-LED flashlight makes if you were to hold it up to a wall. Except it was huge and purple and more dim, as if the source of the light was very far away. I watched this giant circle of light cross horizontally over the dunes in a wavy motion, and then it disappeared. I know it sounds bizarre. I've seen a lot of weird things in my life, and this I have no explanation for. It wasn't an orb. It was seemingly flat against the dunes, and if it was being projected from a light source, I couldn't see where it came from, or how it would be possible, seeing as it covered about a quarter of the dune. So I've spent a lot of time in the desert, in addition to many other answers here relating to the flora and fauna and crazy people. I have one for you that I'm not sure I've posted anywhere before, and to this day, I still have no idea what it was. You see a lot of crazy stuff in the desert, but for me, this one took the cake. Story time. We used to go out camping on the weekends and sit around the campfire at night while rock climbing and hiking during the day. One particular night, some friends and I were hanging out on top of one of the nearby rocks before turning in for bed a bit a ways away from the campfire and tents. Just stargazing and chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, every single star in the sky rapidly moved and created a perfect circle, a ring of stars within a second. It stayed there for maybe 1 to 2 seconds, collapsed in on itself, then popped back to their own position in the sky. The few of us that were stargazing all collectively went whoa, and confirmed with each other that we just saw what we just saw. We never saw anything like that again. Never heard or read of any similar accounts. It was weird stuff. I feel like it is important to mention that none of us were under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, or whatever, since people I've told were like, "Oh my god, how high were you? You crazy desert people in your peyote." Like, nah dude, not my thing. Anyone who's spent long enough in the desert will tell you that there's lots of stuff you can see that's crazy to explain. Ball lightning, crazily behaving shooting stars, those scary moments when all of the coyotes just stop howling, and everything gets dead quiet. It's eerie when that happens. The desert can be a loud place at night. Usually that means something bad is nearby, like a mountain lion or something. Over the years, I've seen lots and lots of strange things. Most are explainable or debunked, like how ball lightning is absolutely not a UFO, just spooky nature stuff. But that star circle thing was the only one that I can't really figure out. Bonus, if you ever get lucky, what's known as heat lightning in the desert is really cool to watch. Perfectly natural, but man, is it neat. I used to live out in the Mojave Desert, and my dad was taking us to the mall one day. We drove through Yermo, which is this tiny town. There's a whole bunch of abandoned houses there, a really good diner called Peggy Sue's, a high school, and a ghost town attraction. Well, my dad wanted to show us the dry lake beds out there, because we had never actually been on one before. So he drove out onto one, and it's about as exciting as you can imagine. Dry, cracked dirt. Well, we kept driving, and right before we were about to get on the road again, we came across something, and at first we couldn't tell what the heck it was. So we got out and went to look at it. It was a baby stroller, completely decorated head to toe with ribbons, beads, pinwheels, flowers, gems, etc. Totally decked out. Like, imagine a Mardi Gras float, but as a baby stroller. Not sure if it was the stroller of a baby that had passed away that was decorated in memoriam, or if it was an art piece, or maybe a homeless person's way of carrying around their belongings that they decorated. But it was just there all alone, drifting in the wind sometimes. I have a picture of it on my old Nintendo DSi. I wish I could share it here. Just imagine walking out there one night and seeing some big thing scooting across the lake bed, covered in stuff. I personally would crap my pants. The weirdest thing I've ever seen was when family friends from the Midwest visited us and wanted to see a real ghost town. None of that commercialized stuff. So after some research on my mom's end, we end up taking them to this ghost town that took a 4-hour drive in a tiny rental car up the side of a mountain with a sheer drop to get to. After an eternity, we get to this ghost town. It's on the top of this mountain, and it was tiny. It lived up to its name and looked real run down. It's so small that we basically can see the whole thing from the car, so we loop around and stop in front of this run-down house to decide if we will get out or just leave. Before we can really discuss it, this man in pants that were rolled down at the waist and rolled up in the pant legs so much that it looked like a diaper runs out of the house flailing his arms and yelling. He asks us what we're doing here, and we said we were looking for the ghost town. He perks up and says that it's $5 for admission, and then turns to me and my friend, who were both 12 at the time, and says, "Kids get in for free," with a menacing expression. He says us gals can go for a swim in his cement pond, and starts rambling about how great the pool is, especially on a hot day. We seem to be all in agreement that we would not like the tour or to swim in the pool, so we leave. We drive forward to see that the pool was actually a really small pond that was concretely green on the top. I was hunting in the northern part of the Red Desert, and after I killed my antelope in broad daylight, an extremely bright and fast-moving light approached me from several miles away, traveling faster than any land vehicle or drone could possibly move, flying low over the stage. It came within a quarter of a mile of me, then zoomed off in the other direction. Scared the ever-loving crap out of me. Haven't gone back out there alone since. No clue what I saw that day. This happened in the Sonoran Desert while I was 16 or younger. I was walking around right after sunset in my neighborhood and heard a loud squeal. In the small light, I saw a javelina staring right at me when I turned around. I was once out in a neighbor's Jeep off-roading as a kid and saw a jaguar or bobcat trying to chase us down as we were on a stretch of flat ground up against some hills. There's a part of the Salt River that we called Chalk City that's in an eastern suburb of Phoenix. I grew up in the neighborhood connected to a farm that owned the land next to it, so would often spend time in the river during dry seasons. One time, while exploring on the opposite side, where most people are, a group of people decided to start shooting at the side of the riverbed. I heard the bullets zoom right past above my head. Just laid down below a berm so I wouldn't get hit, and waited till they left, as I was just a 16-year-old at the time, and really scared. Another time while at the Chalk City, my friends and I were exploring a small cave after dark when a group of coyotes started howling. They were getting closer and continuing to howl, so we booked it back towards the car a half a mile away. Even though we were running, they were getting closer, so we drove off like the Roadrunner. While driving at around 2 a.m. near a popular tubing area, a horse appeared out of nowhere as I drove over a bump in the road. I had to swerve at the last second. The horse couldn't have been in a less visible spot. And not technically a desert story, but as a kid there was a cornfield behind our house, and one of my friend's backyard was connected to it, so we spent a lot of time in it. There were also cattle on the other side of the neighborhood that had a citrus patch connecting. While in the middle of the field at midnight, we heard what sounded like an angry bull and saw the corn moving right by us. The second it started approaching us, we ran back to his backyard wall and jumped back over, nearly crapping ourselves. And to finish it off, there was a reservation across the street from my childhood neighborhood. The Salt River went through it, so we would often walk onto it. Saw a bunch of cops and a helicopter nearby, So we investigated, only to find out that 2 bodies were laying at the bottom of the dry river on the reservation. I build off-road rigs, Jeeps, that we take to Moab, Utah twice a year. Long story short, a buddy and I went wheeling one night towards this trail called High Dive. Mind you, he's on crutches with a broken foot. It's 3 a.m., we are by ourselves, and I flip the Jeep. We smash our radio antenna, and unfortunately the hood caved in due to the wreck and cracked our battery. No cell phone service. Jeep is dead in the water. I decide to start walking back to the nearest road by myself. Pitch black, and my phone is on 6%. Within a mile of the walk, I hear something. Something is running around me. I see light bars off in the distance, so I start jogging towards it. Every 30 seconds to a minute, I hear it again. I cannot tell for the life of me what it was. I finally make it to the road and start hauling butt at this point. A Suburban pulls up with some locals in it. I tell them the situation, and I hop in and start going towards my Jeep. Once in the Jeep, I explain to them what I've been hearing. Their faces light up. We turn onto the dirt road that leads to the trailhead, and lo and behold, what's 50 to 60 feet in front of the car? A huge mountain lion. This thing has been sizing me up the whole 3-mile walk, and I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. I was on a field trip in the central Utah desert in 1999 during a Mormon cricket swarm. The road was a blanket of them. There was a tower of gulls, literally 10,000 of them circling in a massive tower hundreds of feet high, and they would periodically swoop down and gorge, only to vomit then get back up. Sometimes they'd be too full to fly. The crickets would swarm and eat them. The smell. Oh my God, the smell. We had to stop every 10 minutes or so to clean out the radiator. They completely clogged the fins. For context, hold out your thumb. Yes, that big. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm walking down a small mountain one night. They're scattered around town. I step on something in the dark that feels like a person's arm. Then I hear the rattle. Oh God, I'm about to be bitten by a rattlesnake. I can't run. The terrain is walkable with care, but a guaranteed fall otherwise. So I keep walking, waiting for the bite. But I never ended up getting bitten, after all. This happened to me a few years ago. I live in Arizona, by the way, in the mighty Mojave. I was on my patio, having just finished dragging 2 full trash cans of weeds and dead branches from my backyard. My dog, my little buddy, was, as usual for him, following me around like my shadow. It was a nice, clear crystal blue day in early May, when it's not too hot and not too cold, and I was feeling pretty good. I became aware of a car pulling up in my driveway, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that it was a big black SUV. At first, I thought it was an aunt of mine, the only person that I know with one. I'm a little surprised by the sudden visit, but whatever. I scoot the trash cans off to the side of my gate, and then turn to wave, suddenly stopping. It's at this point that I see the word sheriff written on the side in big red letters. Immediately, I start wondering if I had done something illegal. I was fairly certain that I hadn't, and that's when the thought that something happened to my mom and grandma popped into my head. They were both out at a casino that day, and now I start worrying that there was an accident, or maybe a carjacking. Then the deputy gets out. I see on his face a very large grin, and that threw me off. I approach my gate and quiet down my little buddy, who started growling, as he always did whenever someone or something started to come onto the property. He approaches the gate, and I politely greet him. "Hello there, officer. How can I help you?" I say, trying to keep a cool exterior, while internally I am frantically trying to think of a reason as to why he would be here. "Hello, sir," he said, still grinning. "Do you live here?" "Yes, sir," I answer. "And are you the only person who lives here?" he asks me. I'm still very nervous and confused, but I answer him. "Yes, sir." "We got some calls of complaints about someone at this address," he explains. I was thrown through another loop, as I had not been expecting that being the reason. I generally keep to myself, and I don't do things like shoot off fireworks or make a lot of noise, so I couldn't imagine what I could have done to warrant someone calling the cops on me to complain. While this had been confusing enough already, I was sorely unprepared for what the officer had to say next. "Yeah, we got a call from one of your neighbors that someone at this address, matching your description, has been climbing on the roof and firing a microwave gun into their head in order to change their thoughts." I stand there for what felt like a full 30 seconds, letting what he said sink into me. "What?" I asked after it had sunk in, not comprehending what I had just been told. He was still smiling, and it was now dawning on me that he was actively trying not to laugh, hence the smile, as he calmly repeated what he had said. I then asked him to repeat himself a third time, to which he complied, and my brain finally was able to accept this new piece of information. Several sets of new neighbors had been moving into the area, and one of them was a very, let's say, odd man. We'll call him Weirdo. Well, Weirdo had just moved into his house at the end of the street with his sister. At first he seemed nice, if maybe a little bit too friendly. After creeping me and a bunch of people out with the weird things he would say, usually about his knife collection, he had gone and said some very gross sexual things to my mom, who at the time had been working as a cashier at the general store. She almost tossed him out right then and there. His sister I felt bad for, because she was constantly going around town apologizing for the things that he would say and do. Anyways, I just knew that Weirdo had been the one to call and complain about me using an imaginary ray gun on him, because that seemed in the ballpark of things that he would do. The officer told me that he was required to ask me if I had a microwave gun anywhere on the property. At that point in time, part of his job was to ask me if I was in possession of an imaginary ray gun. In a very calm voice, I said, "No, sir. I don't even know what a microwave gun would even look like." "Neither do I," he said, shaking his head, letting slip a chuckle. "But I had to ask. And I have to ask you to please refrain from using one in the future." It was at this point that his composure slipped some more, and he started to laugh outright. While part of me did find it very funny as well, and I still do, a more pragmatic part of me started to worry about Weirdo and his delusions involving me. I know that the vast majority of people with mental illnesses are not going to harm anybody, but this dude was constantly going on about his knives, and how apparently he had some kind of fixation on me. I found it more unnerving than anything. Once the officer had regained his composure, yet was still smiling, he informed me that he could not tell me who it was that called in, but that he felt that I should be aware of them. I told him that I had a pretty good idea of who it was, and pointed down the street toward Weirdo's house. He stopped me, and said that he was going somewhere else on the street, and that I really should pay attention as to where he goes next. I nodded, and after he got back in his vehicle and backed out, I watched and waited for him to go to Weirdo's house. He doesn't. He pulls into the driveway of the house right across the street from mine. I am absolutely dumbfounded, as the man who had moved in I had never spoken 2 words to, or even met before. Out of some weird instinct, I ducked down a peek out through the lattice next to my gate, not wanting to be seen. The officer pulled in and got out of his SUV. He walked right up to the front door and knocked. Instantly, just as he pulled his hand away, the door was wrenched open, and out comes the owner, screaming his head off. I couldn't quite understand what he was screaming, just that it was something along the lines of, "You can't be here." I was amazed by the composure of the deputy. He remained calm as this lunatic was screaming right in his face, and was trying to calm him down. As soon as the guy was calmed down, he cussed at the officer, then stormed back inside and slammed the door behind him. I was afraid that he was going to look back in my direction, so I had ducked down behind my fence, which my little buddy took to mean that I wanted to play. The officer drove off, and I had heard nothing else about any complaints. Well, the next day, after I had told my mom about this, she went and spoke to her friend who was the real estate agent that sold him the house. For those who don't already know, my mom pretty much knows everyone in town. This is how she told me the conversation went. "You know that house that you sold across the street from my son?" "Yeah." "Did you know that you sold it to a lunatic?" "Oh my God, what did he do now?" I can't help but feel like either I or my mom, i.e. her friend, should have gotten a phone call or something, just a casual heads up. Apparently, this guy had a bit of a reputation in the local real estate community, at least from what my mom's friend hinted. I mean, I respect other people's privacy, but come on. Just by the way, your new neighbor might be slightly mentally ill or something. Well, not a full week later, I'm in my car, driving home from the grocery store. I'm nearing my street, and I smell some smoke, and my thought process was along the lines of, "Oh, someone's grilling. I think I'll start thawing and marinating some steaks and throw them on the grill tomorrow." Well, as I'm driving up my street towards my house, I see the lunatic standing in his front yard, spraying his house with his garden hose. I just write it off as him being odd, but then I see my mom in my driveway frantically waving. I pull in to see what was happening and look behind me, now seeing the flames. I don't know how my eyes just kind of glazed over the smoke rising from his house, but I could see it now. My mom had seen it and came running, worried that it was my house, and then seeing that it wasn't, worried that the main gas line would ignite and blow up. The fire department shows up, I think 10 minutes later, and get to work on it, but the house is not salvageable. He did, before they show up, started running in and pulling stuff out and set it down in his front yard, going back in and repeating this multiple times. I counted 3 rifles and a handgun, and lots of ammo being amongst the pile in his front yard. Before the fire department arrived and one of the firefighters made him stop. I wasn't listening to what they were saying, as I was hiding behind my fence again. I was terrified that this guy was going to jump to the conclusion that the guy with the microwave gun, whom he had called the police on, had simply talked to him and nothing else, might have had something to do with this. It was later discovered that an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. The house burnt down almost completely to the ground. There were some walls and ceilings still kind of standing, but it was completely unsalvageable. The guy moved away, and I didn't hear anything more about him. That was definitely one of the craziest things to happen to me out here, and definitely in my top 10. When I was a young child, we lived in a very sparsely populated part of the Mojave Desert called Lake LA. When I was around the age of 3, my mother would often be awoken at night to hear me crying. First, let me explain the layout of my room, because this is relevant later. My room was in the front of the house, with a big window facing the front yard. Opposite the window was a closet with mirrored sliding doors. My bed was directly under the big window facing the front yard. Anyway, when my mom would come into my room to see why I was crying, I would tell her that there was an Indian in my closet. She thought that it was just me having nightmares, and she would comfort me until I fell back asleep. One night, the same thing happens. She hears me crying in the room. This has happened multiple times, with me claiming to see the Indian. One night when she enters my room, she sees a native man looking through my window. I was seeing his reflection in the closet door opposite the window. He ran off, and the encounter stopped. My mom reminded me of this years later when I was a teenager. I recounted the story to a friend who grew up in the same area of the desert, and she said that both her and a friend had the same experience of a native man looking in their window. Was he just a creepy guy, or something else? Was he planning on abducting me? I live in a small town in Arizona. It's in the Mojave Desert, and it is beautiful. Sparse, wide open spaces, but just gorgeous. At least to me. When I was 15, I was walking my dog in the summer at 9 in the morning. I was followed by a big white truck. It looked a little beat up. But at first, I just figured that it was someone new to town and lost. I stopped and waited for them to pull up to next to me, presumably to roll down the window and ask me for directions or something. But no, they just stopped and stayed there. I was creeped out, but I was on my street, so I figured I could just go home and call the cops if something happens. I keep walking. My dog is just happily jogging about, marking his territory with glee. As I turn us into our driveway, the car speeds up and pulls right up next to me. The window rolls down, and a man with a brown beard and sunglasses on leans over the passenger seat to shout at me. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked a very confused me. "Just taking my dog for a walk," I said. "Why are you doing it so early?" "Because I don't want him or myself to die from heat stroke. I had a tendency to be a bit of a smart butt when I was a teenager, but I was being sincere when I said that. Here in the Mojave, temperatures in the summer can reach the mid to high 120s later in the day." "You visiting someone?" That just threw me off. I'm going home," I said, pointing to my house. He just stares at me without saying anything for a few moments. "I've never seen you around here before," he said. "I've lived here for about 10 years now," I said, starting to feel equal parts creeped out and annoyed. He didn't seem to like that. "I'll be checking that. We keep an eye out for suspicious individuals here," he said. "Good for you," I said. I was not being sincere when I said that. I just started walking up my driveway, looking back to see that he was watching me the entire time. I pulled out my keys and opened the door and led my little buddy inside. I shut and locked the door behind me. My mom had already been up doing some work on the roof. Again, mid to high 120s in the middle of the day, and was just taking a break. I told her what happened and she was furious. She grabbed her hammer and walked out the front door and down the driveway, but the weirdo was gone. Not a full 5 minutes had to have passed before the phone started to ring. We always let the answering machine get it. It was someone from the neighborhood watch, notifying us that a suspicious individual was spotted on our property. My mom picked up the phone and hit the talk button and laid into the guy. She demanded to know why some freak was following her 15-year-old child around, and she used a lot of colorful language. similar to if she stubs her toe, so a lot of blank sucker and mother blankers spewed forth. She told me the guy stammered a bit again and said that he was with the neighborhood watch. She told him that if anyone ever was following her boy again, she was going to drag them out by their blanky truck and bash all of their teeth in with a hammer. Please bear in mind that normally my mom is very warm and bubbly. She just likes to make sure someone who messes with her children knows why that's a very bad idea. She then hung up and called her friend. She knows everybody in town, who was essentially in charge of the neighborhood watch, and much more calmly explained the situation. Turns out that a new guy moved to town recently and was very adamant about finding out if there was a neighborhood watch. When he heard that there was, he was very excited and joined at the very first opportunity. Apparently, he thought that he was actually a member of law enforcement, as he hadn't been a member more than a month and already had gotten 7 complaints prior. I guess he had seen a teenager and thought troublemaker or something. Granted, I have been told before that I look sinister, but still. He was kicked out of the neighborhood watch regardless, although I think that there were more call-ins to complain about him. So, to the overzealous law enforcement wannabe, let's not meet again. This story happened over 20 years back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive by myself for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together, until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me and my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no streetlights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area, stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited, and as a 30 to 40s man started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead. I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help him out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes, so I agreed to, as gently as I could, push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way. Only, they start following me. So here I am. It's 9:50 at night. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from getting home and getting away from my friend's house. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light except for car headlights. and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turn down a road that I know gave me a couple turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, oh crap. I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop around back to the station, and they follow me again. So at least I know that they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up right behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and then floor it. The wheels dig into the rocks and poof dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know that I couldn't see him behind the counter. He was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So, to the two drunk idiots that wanted to mess around with me, a 16-year-old on my first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. I'm a 30-year-old female, and the guy in this story looked to be about 35 to 40 years old. I was driving home on the highway, and there was a van in front of me. I was behind this van for several miles before I decided to pass. It was a 4-lane highway, so no vehicles or anything that would come in front of me. I was having no problem passing this guy. As soon as I made it almost to the point of me fully past him, he speeds up. So I proceed to speed up, because I am clearly trying to pass. He speeds up to be right beside my car and keeps gesturing and waving at me, almost to signal me to pull over. I floor it and pass the guy, keeping speed to just get away from him. I see him slow down and kind of wave at me almost like a bye or hello type of wave. Then a few seconds after speeds up, going to the passing lane, and speeds up to be right next to my car. He motions again, almost like asking me to pull over. He pointed to himself and pointed to me. I literally flip this guy off, and he won't speed up. I slow down. He slows down. I speed up. He speeds up. I tried slamming my brakes to lose him and nothing. I finally pull my phone out and start recording, and he finally speeds up to pass. I see this guy trying to make a turn exactly where I'm going towards my house. I go the opposite way to a store, where I know there will be a lot of people, and stay there for about an hour. What in the actual crap? I'm honestly so unsettled. To answer some questions, there's nothing wrong with my vehicle. I have dents in the car and rust, but nothing concerning. My tire rim is a bit dented, but you can't see that at high speeds, and doesn't make sense to do what he did. If I thought someone's tire was flat or something, I'd point to their tire, or roll my window down, not be an absolute creep. Also, I'm not sure what would have upset him, as it's not like I cut him off or anything. I was behind him for miles. He didn't appear to be in a road rage, not hitting the steering wheel or anything like that. Just seemed persistent that he wanted to get me to stop. The way he was gesturing to himself and me, almost shrugging, like, come on. It was so weird. I got a picture of his vehicle, and I'm tempted to make a report, in case he tries to do this with other women. I was reading some of these at work the other day, and I remembered a creepy encounter that happened to my friend, sister, and I. This happened when we were a lot younger. I would say that we were still in elementary school, maybe 7th grade. For context, the town I lived in was pretty chill. We had a movie theater that was next to a few stores and restaurants, so our moms would drop us off, and sometimes we would walk around after the movie was over and just hang out at Walmart or Whataburger. This one particular night, we were in the Walmart parking lot on the way back to the movie theater to get picked up, and an older man with a van called to us and said, "Wow, I can't open up my DVD. Can you guys please come over here and help me open it?" Now, my sister and I immediately thought, why would a grown man ask us kids to help him open a DVD in a parking lot? My friend, who was a male, immediately started walking towards the man, and we stopped him before he was close to him, saying that it was weird and we should get away from him. He wanted to be the man in the situation, but we were kids. What was he gonna do? Anyways, we get really scared and ended up sprinting away and not looking back. It wasn't as creepy as some of the other stories on here, but I'm glad that we didn't stick around to find out. This is my first post ever, and also the reason that I made this profile to begin with. I'm a 33-year-old female, but this happened back when I was 24. I'm a nurse by profession. At the time, I was working at an outpatient facility. I was stuck on strictly night shift at the time, and to this day, I still get antsy during the night shift. For those that may not know, outpatient facilities are used for patients that are recovering from surgery. On a typical night, we would have 1 or 2. It was rare that we would have any more than that. I don't remember how many we had on this night, but it was somewhere along those lines. During the night, there were a few things that I was required to do, and would act upon request if needed. But me and the med tech were usually in the nurse's room, which was right next to our desk, watching TV and playing on our phones. We also had a security guard. It was an unarmed guard position, which I still have my issues with, and they did less than we did. Our full-time guard was a man who, at the time, was pushing 70. Don't get me wrong, he was the biggest sweetheart in the world, but if push ever came to shove, I don't know how effective he would have been in the state of crisis. Our other guard was a part-timer. He only worked 2 to 3 shifts every couple of weeks. My partner used to joke that he was a professional NPC because he worked several different jobs to make ends meet. At the time, he was 28, and the nursing staff tended to favor him because he actually did his job properly. One reservation that I did have about him was that he wasn't always in the security office. He actually conducted his checks and would do a few checks at an adjoining facility, so he wasn't always at his desk. We didn't always need him, but it was nice to have him there in case we needed to go outside. This was one of the nights that he was working, and this was the circumstance. So this isn't great for a nurse to say, but I used to have to go out a few times a night to have a sneaky cigarette. I've quit smoking since, but at the time I would probably leave between 4 to 6 times a night to smoke near my car. It was around midnight, give or take. I was posted up against my car smoking when these 2 guys started walking through the parking lot. Trespassing was a big no-no, but the parking lot was a shortcut to a local motel, which is a creepy encounter all on its own, and security usually wouldn't get involved if people were just quickly passing through. The 2 guys spotted me and called out to me. I didn't respond, which seemed to be an invitation for them to approach. I know I should have just tossed the cigarette and went back inside, but 24-year-old me ignored that common sense. Both of these guys were probably in their mid-20s. Nothing off-looking about them, aside from the way that they were walking and the fact that they were going to the motel. They probably wouldn't have stood out in a crowd to me, One of them asked me for a cigarette. I said that I left my pack inside and I couldn't help them. He then started asking me questions about my job, where I was from, and how old I was. I didn't take the bait on any of these questions. I told them I had to get back inside. One of them stood sort of in my way, and the other asked if he could have my number. I said no. The thing that took me overboard was one of them had moved my jacket to see my name tag and put his face really close to it to read my name. It was obvious that he was just trying to look at my chest. That was the line for me, and I pushed past them and foolishly went to the front door that my keycard didn't open. So I had literally cornered myself between the door and these two random guys. I had to find a way around them to get to the side door that I exited from. But judging by their body language, that wasn't going to go my way. Thankfully, I was greeted with a familiar voice. Our friendly neighborhood security guard was apparently checking the other facility and managed to show up in time before I had to either run or plead. One of the guys got smart with him, but after an intense staring contest, he backed down and the two left. I did enjoy the look on his face when he realized that he was actually dealing with someone who could probably cause him serious harm. I remember giving him a hug and thanking him. I started looking forward to his shifts. He made us all feel a lot safer. After that, he and I would converse, and he would walk outside with me if I wanted to smoke, and we would occasionally split a pizza or something during our shifts that coincided. I know it is an incredibly conventional story about the man that would become your husband 3 years later and give you two beautiful little girls, but it's a story that reminds me that he's always had my back. To this day, I don't know what these two guys' intentions were, and as much as I'd love to believe that they wouldn't have tried anything in plain view of security cameras, being a nurse has taught me that people frequently don't think with their heads sometimes. I'm just grateful that divine intervention sent someone in the way of that, and gave me the best guy in the world. I didn't mean to turn sappy. Stay safe, everyone. Hi everyone. I'm pretty disturbed right now, and I don't really know who to talk to, so I decided to post here. I recently moved into a new house, an old building from the 1920s located in a quiet neighborhood. Everything was fine until I started noticing weird things. About 2 weeks ago, I saw a weird man hanging around my property. It was late at night, and he seemed to be rummaging through my trash cans. At first, I thought that it was just someone lost or a homeless person looking for food, so I didn't pay much attention. But things started to get more worrying. One night, I saw him through my kitchen window, just standing there staring at my house. He was wearing dirty clothes, and had a blank look on his face, almost like he wasn't really seeing what he was looking at. I turned on the outside lights and he ran away quickly. Since that day, I keep seeing him sporadically. Sometimes I find footprints in the mud near my windows, or objects moved around the house. Once, I even found an old shoe half buried in my garden, like someone tried to hide something. The worst part is that I started hearing weird noises at night, scratching at the windows, light knocks on the walls, and indistinct whispers that seemed to come from outside. I called the police several times, but every time they arrive, the man is gone, and they don't find any traces of him. My friends think I'm paranoid that I'm imagining things because of stress of the move, but I can't help feeling like there's really someone watching me and trying to scare me. I'm starting to doubt my own sanity. Sometimes I wonder if I'm imagining all this. But the footprints, the moved objects, and the noises are real. Has anyone ever experienced something similar, or have any advice on what I should do? Any help would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for reading. I need help. Nobody around me believes me. For context, I live in a small trailer in central Wisconsin, and directly next to us is a railway that goes across the whole state and leads to a Walmart if you head down for 20 minutes. I was a teenager in 8th grade at the time, with no car or transportation other than a bike. The railroad tracks go in a straight line directly leading to Walmart. So if I were to bike to the Walmart, it takes me about the same time as if I walked straight down the tracks. So, more often than not, I would walk as I was never really a big fan of riding bikes, as I have had back issues since a young age. On this date in particular, I decided to head to Walmart for some dumb kid stuff shortly before the sun was about to set. This detail will come into play later. Basically, I went to the store and got distracted just looking around. Bought some food and drink and some trading cards, but left as the sun was going down. It's about a 20 to 25 minute walk home, and I decided to head straight down the tracks again. At about the 10-minute mark, it was getting very dark, and I was a generally fearful and anxious child due to my autism. I was scared of the dark until I was about 14 and a half, and would often have nightmares or see things that weren't in my closet, or dark corners, etc. So as it became too dark to see, I was getting extremely nervous and hypervigilant. 5 minutes later, I could swear that I was hearing footsteps crunching in the rocks lining these tracks that weren't mine. I stopped a few times to listen and confirmed that someone was walking towards me from a significant distance away. I could not see them at this point because of the darkness and lack of lighting across the railroad tracks. I had no phone or flashlight of any kind. At this point, I started freaking out internally. At first, I didn't know what to do, but as the sound of the footsteps got closer, I decided to call out and let them know that I was coming towards them. I stopped as I did this, and something along the lines of, "Is someone there?" While I know this might seem silly as an adult, I was used to my brain playing tricks on me in darkness, and I was convinced that I was seeing things. No response. At this point, the footsteps were getting closer, but still too difficult to distinguish over my own. So I stopped. The footsteps continued for a brief moment, and then they stopped too. I called out again. I said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response again. I was still prepubescent, and I had a child's voice. I feel like any reasonable adult would have responded and said yes, or "Yeah, I'm just walking," or whatever, as I had genuine, noticeable fear in my voice. After I received no response again, I told myself that I was just imagining it and continued on my journey. At this point being just under 15 minutes from my house, and I heard them again, footsteps coming closer as soon as I started walking. At this point, fear took over, and I started yelling and making whooping sounds, thinking that it might be some sort of animal. I yelled such things as, "I know you're there, and I have a knife," which was total crap, but I thought that it might encourage this person to respond. Still, nothing. A few times as I was speaking, I would hear the footsteps stop again. Finally, about 3 to 5 minutes later, stopping multiple times and hearing his footsteps stop. Sorry, I can't give a specific time frame. I was in total fight or flight mode, scared out of my mind, so it gets a little hazy from here. I start seeing this guy materialize out of the darkness. He had on blue jeans, a dark hoodie with a hood completely masking his face from the distance. I was instantly relieved for whatever reason. Relieved to know that I wasn't crazy, maybe. I don't know. And began verbal vomiting to this guy that I was just scared, and I didn't know that he was on the tracks with me for sure. He again did not respond, and this was before mainstream Bluetooth audio, and I didn't notice any headphone cables when I passed him. Because he didn't respond, I was eyeing him warily as he approached, and we locked eyes. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine. He was staring at me coldly and blankly, with a menacing look in his eyes, like he was thinking about what to do. He had his hands shoved in his pockets, and as I was passing him, he looked like he was going to pull something out of his right hand. I was a very scrawny kid, and even though I have back problems, I was fast as heck. I just hurt from running for too long. From then on, going down the tracks at a full sprint, it was all a blur. I tripped and fell twice, as well as soaked myself in mud when I tried to get across the small ditch separating the track from the trailer park. And then I got home. I never told my mom, and I never walked on those tracks at night again. After reading through this again, I thought I would describe the tracks for a bit of context. They are on an elevated hill next to the trailers, and you can either walk a minute in the wrong direction to get on at the main road I live on, or you can cut through this one small spot where some people had put a board down for that exact purpose, to get across the ditch and onto the tracks. The board was broken in half and partially submerged, so it was kind of like you had to jump and land on the board with one foot, and then kick off to the other side. The ditch is maybe 3 feet across, so it's not a huge jump, but it always has nasty standing water in it. Once you get on the tracks, there is a super long stretch with absolutely no way off, other than private property of a factory the railway delivers goods to, which you can get in trouble for trespassing on. Then there's a junction about 20 minutes down, and another 5 minutes from which is where the Walmart is. Due to this, I couldn't just get off the tracks when I ran away. I had to get to the ditch before I would be able to. This happened to me about 10 years ago. I'm a female, and I was 18 at the time working in a very popular chain restaurant in my local mall. It was one famous for breakfasts, and the uniform was a brightly collared button-down shirt that was easily recognizable. It was a Sunday, our busiest day of the week, and a holiday on top of that, so we were crowded and crazy busy. When it came time for my lunch break, I didn't want to bother the kitchen with my order, so I decided to quickly pop out to a different restaurant to eat, and return to help my coworkers again. It was very crowded and slow going. After a bit of walking, a tall, older man casually fell into step next to me. At first, I didn't pay him any mind due to the crowd, but then he started talking directly to me, and it was difficult to ignore. "Hey there, what's your name? Where do you work?" Unfortunately, I still had my name tag on, and it showed both the restaurant and my name, so I said nothing in response. "Oh, I should stop by for some pancakes and waffles sometime." No response. No eye contact either. Any other question he asked me was answered with silence, or one-word answers. I was afraid to be impolite, but also really didn't want to give him any leeway. Finally, he asked, "How old are you?" "I'm 15. I was absolutely of age, but I hoped that lie would push him off. He was definitely in his 30s. Then, "Hey, I can work with that," and he touched my shoulder. I don't know what kind of reaction he wanted from me, but I instantly recoiled, eyes wide. I ducked into the closest store, probably a GameStop, and started browsing like my life depended on it. Fortunately, he didn't follow me into the GameStop, nor did he follow me when I finally left to grab my quick lunch. I didn't see him again, and if he ever did stop by the restaurant for his pancake and waffles, I never did have the misfortune of serving him, thank God. It still stuns me to this day that I barely reciprocated, and then told him I was underage, and none of that made him stop trying to interact with me. That also isn't the only time I was followed around the mall by a strange man, but it definitely was the worst one, in my opinion. So, for a little bit of a backstory, I'm currently a 27-year-old female at the time of writing this, but the encounter that I'm going to describe took place when I was 21-ish. When I was 21, I moved to a new city for school. I didn't know anybody, and I was suffering your typical first time away from home loneliness. A lot of this had to do with being separated from my best friend for the first time, and I was desperate for some companionship. I took to dating apps to try and build some sort of a bridge. I had a couple of dates which ultimately didn't work out, but I guess that isn't so important. I matched with this one guy. He seemed like the whole package. He was cute. He was into music, art, and we had a mutual love of Stephen King. We talked for about a week, and we eventually exchanged numbers and continued talking in more depth. I was young and naive enough at the time to catch a feeling for this guy, and I honestly thought that I was falling for him. We talked in depth for about another week. He got to know me very personally, and it was scary to me how much we had in common. We made a date to meet at a bar. He told me he was running a little behind, and to go have a drink at the bar and he would meet me there. It was sort of late afternoon, so the area was fairly empty. They had 2 other girls that showed up at the bar during my time there. One of the girls had broken our silence by saying that she was there for a first date with a really cute guy, and she was nervous, and asked if me or the other girl had any advice for her. Oh, how cute. I was there for a first date too that I was extremely excited about. The other girl was also there for a first date with a guy. We shared our thoughts and really hyped each other up. It was a total sister bonding moment. That was until we all drew the conclusion that we were there to meet the same guy. Same pictures, different names, different personalities. This guy played us in a big way. Believe it or not, this was actually a huge letdown that turned into something good. The 3 of us ended up hitting it off naturally, and we actually stayed at the bar and talked. Since then, the 3 of us became really close, and both are serving in my upcoming wedding. We just clicked over the mutual embarrassment. One of them actually lives with me, and we truly became best friends. But now, on to the subject of my wedding. Over the weekend, I had my bachelorette party trip. My fiancé had his bachelor's party trip over the weekend as well. He and his friends were staying at a fishing camp, while me and my friends were at an Airbnb not very far away. It wasn't a huge trip or anything like that. We just wanted to have a good time. Well, we were really enjoying ourselves. I had to go shopping one day at a nearby store where my longtime best friend and 2 other best friends joined me. Not to give too much information, but I had to buy a new bra. That'll probably be relevant in a bit. That night, we're playing Cards Against Humanity and having some drinks. It got to the portion of the evening where my mom wanted to go around the room so everyone could tell how they met me, a cringe story, or anything they wanted to share. I wasn't looking forward to that, but it's customary. And oh, did it ever lead to something. One of my best friends, one that I met in the bar, came forward for her turn and laid quite the truth out on the table. So apparently, that day where the 3 of us showed up for a date with the same guy was completely and meticulously orchestrated. She was having trouble making friends of her own, and she noticed me and the other girl at school. She made a fake dating profile after apparently hearing the 2 of us mentioning it at some point, and essentially stalked the app until she found us. This is how she got to know us, which is why we were all able to hit it off so easily. She orchestrated this whole thing in order to make friends. Her cadence and her delivery of the story was so strange. It was so creepy. First of all, it was a big revelation, and it's a strong relationship built on deceit. I honestly felt violated and very uneasy. My mom cut through the tension by changing the subject. Later, I was outside playing my guitar when my best friend and other best friend, I'm sorry I could have given them alternate names, came outside. We discussed it, and also mutually agreed that it was really weird, and she picked a heck of a time to drop this bomb. So many things that once seemed so innocent started taking on a more creepy undertone. Just the day before, this girl was in the same fitting room as me while I was trying on new bras. She has pictures of the three of us together on the mirror in her bedroom. I personally got out of that kind of thing in high school, but given the recent revelation, it just adds some ick to the mix. We've shared very intimate details about some of our lives, and I'm now wondering what's true and what's not. I called my fiancé that night and asked if I could see him. Not for the reason of what I described, I just missed him. He was thrown off by the story. He didn't know how to feel about it, and also said that he wouldn't have known what he would have done if one of his buddies did that with him. I feel betrayed. Maybe I'm overreacting, but if I am, I'm not the only one. I mean, I guess nobody got hurt, but it was a creepy way of taking advantage of two people who were vulnerable. I've been reading here for a while, so I figured it's time to post my creepy encounter. I've had a lot of them. I'm a server/bartender. A few years back, before I started dating my fiancé, I worked at IHOP. We had a new manager and she was awesome. She was almost like a big sister. We had this table of semi-regulars, 2 guys old enough to be my dad. One started hitting on me and asking my manager about me. At this point, I'd been single for a while, and she told him to ask me out himself. She meant no harm. So I mean, I guess he was alright, attractive enough for his age. He asked me out, and to be polite, I said he could just leave his number. I felt uncomfortable, but didn't think much of it. The next weekend, they came in and requested my section. I was busy, and mostly just went about my business. He asked me a few times why I never called, and I kept responding that I was busy with my 2 jobs and my young sister. The next week, he comes in again and requests my section, asking why I still never called. So I told him once again that I had been busy. I was starting to feel very uncomfortable and ignored them that day until it was time for the check. They paid, and I thought I had seen the last of them that day. I went over and started talking to my coworkers. All of a sudden, I feel arms around my waist from behind, and before I could react, he kissed the side of my face. He told me that he'd see me as soon as he left me standing in shock. He came in the next weekend and asked to sit in my section again. I panicked. It's probably worth noting that I'm a victim of DV from a previous relationship, which made the situation worse. I don't like people touching me, especially people that I don't know. I told my boss that I couldn't take the table and why. He kicked them out and told them to never come back. The creeper flipped me off on the way out. I recently acquired a new roommate. The entire situation should have never happened, but I need someone to help me with rent, so a Craigslist posting later he moved in. His name was Greg, and his disclosures to me that he did have some strange sleeping behaviors, sleep talking, sleepwalking, and night terrors. Funny thing was, I also had a history of sleepwalking, but only on rare occasions. The first incident occurred about 1 week later when I hear him screaming in the middle of the night. Since we both slept in different rooms on different sides of the house, the screams sounded distant, but enough to scare me so much that I ran in to check on him. As I got closer to his bedroom, he stopped screaming, so I just went back to bed. For the next month, he had no issues. I noticed he had no friends or family that would visit, and I never saw or heard him on the phone or texting. Then another random night, Greg started screaming again. Same thing. I got up and started to go to his room, but he'd stop. Then one night, I was awoken by screaming in my bedroom. I couldn't see anything in the panic, so I turned on the bedside lamp, and he was at the foot of my bed wearing some sleeping clothes, athletic shorts and a t-shirt. This really scared me, so I started screaming and woke him up. He apologized and went back to bed. Then the scariest thing happened. About 2 nights later, I awoke to clanking. It sounded like tools and hammers tapping. I turned on the light to see Greg kneeling down in a corner, working on something with his hands. A few seconds after turning the light on, Greg froze, then slowly turned his upper body around and stared blankly at me, while I laid in bed. I was beyond creeped out, so I slowly slid out of bed and left the house. After sleeping in my truck down the road in an empty church parking lot, I returned to the house at about 8 in the morning. Greg was gone. All of his belongings were gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. It was like he never lived there. I didn't know any of his friends or family, so I had no one to call about him. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. When I moved out after the lease was up, I was moving furniture out of my bedroom. In the corner of the room where I last saw Greg kneeling down, I realized that the floor vent for the air conditioning was loose. Inside the floor vent was an envelope with a ton of pictures of me sleeping. The pictures had handwritten dates and times written on the back of the pictures. The only other item was a whittled down wooden broom handle brought to a point. I truly believe that Greg was preparing to kill me that night, and he realized it. Because it was the sleepwalking Greg that was going to do it. He left to save my life. It appears that Greg had been coming into my room almost nightly and working on making the broom handle, a stabbing weapon, and I never heard him until the last night that I saw him. Cool cabin in the woods within walking distance of the beach. Before I left, my stepfather gave me a loaded .38. It was very late and dark, and nobody was on the highway. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat next to me. Back then, we could legally have car seats in the front. I noticed a car coming up behind me, and passed, but then slowed down, driving alongside of me. I sped up and slowed down, but could not shake him. I looked over, and this guy had his interior light on, and was furiously gesturing for me to pull over. I knew I had to find a safe place. There was nobody else on the road, and I was running low on gas. There was just nothing on this highway for miles. I kept driving, but this guy would not leave me alone. I was getting very frightened, but the mama bear was coming out, and I was getting very angry as well. I knew he could see my kid who was still sleeping. Finally, there was an exit up ahead and a gas station in the middle of nowhere, so I took the exit with the guy closely following me. I wasn't sure what to do. The gas station was brightly lit but had no customers. I didn't feel that it was safe to pull in, so I slowly passed it, drove further into the dark, deserted landscape, and pulled into a large dirt area and drove quite a ways off the highway with him following. Absolutely nothing around. I knew that I was in big trouble and needed to take control and wanted to put him in a vulnerable situation. Mama Bear was in full protective mode, and I was angry. I stopped the car, grabbed the gun, and jumped out, locking the car behind me. As he pulled up, I ran around to the passenger's side and waited. He then got out of his car and quickly moved towards me, and I suddenly held the gun up, visible in the moonlight. He came to a halt surprised, and I then leveled the gun across the car, taking aim, and waited. He stood there, weighing his options, and then turned around. got back in his car, and left. Not a word was spoken, and it totally freaked me out. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. I was hitching from Northern California to Oregon and was just south of Crescent City, literally like right on the outskirts. But if you're familiar with that area, you understand it's like middle of nowhere and then the town. So I'm there with my dog, and this man pulls up in an RV. He comes to the back door of the RV and opens it. Instead of me just talking to him as he is sitting in the cab to tell him where I'm going, I found this to be odd and felt uneasy. The guy just opens the side door, looks at me sternly and says, "Get in." I was horrified. I turned to look at my dog, as I was surprised she wasn't barking at him or anything like that. She always barked at anyone whom she perceived as a potential threat. When I looked at her, she was shaking violently, as if in complete terror. Super weird and creepy, because my dog was afraid of no one. I looked back at the man, said no thank you, and my dog and I walked off quickly to the next town. If the town hadn't been literally right there, I likely would not be sharing this story with you today. I am sure of it. I'm a 41-year-old female, but when I was 20 years old, I attended college in northeastern Pennsylvania. I lived off of campus and had a part-time job at a local mall. The mall was just over a mile away, and I would walk to and from work regularly. The mall generally closed at 9 p.m., and I would finish my closing tasks and start walking home at around 9:30 p.m. or 10 p.m. at the latest. Occasionally, I could get a ride home with a coworker, but most of them were high schoolers getting picked up by their parents. One night, I was walking my familiar route home. There were never many people out and about downtown until I got back onto the campus, which I would cut across to get home. This night, I was only a few blocks from the mall. I noticed a van parked on the next corner, but didn't think anything of it initially. There were always a smattering of cars parked around. The van appeared to be running, and the headlights were on, but assumed someone must be loading something into or out of one of the local businesses along the street. A man crouched behind a dumpster there, and he was running straight at the open van door. The scary part was that I was directly between him and that open van door. He was trying to shove me into the van. The force he hit me with only got my head and shoulders into the open door, while the majority of my body was outside on the ground. I remember he grabbed me around the waist and was trying to horse me up through the door, but I was just discombobulated dead weight. He jumped over me into the van, grabbed a handful of my hair and started to pull me off the ground and into the van. This is when the headlights from a car turning down the street washed over me, and I could briefly see this was a white guy in a black hoodie. When I saw the car, I screamed loudly and started wildly flailing my arms. I heard their brakes screech, and the guy let go of my hair. I jumped back, and the hooded jerk slammed the door shut, and seconds later accelerated away. A cute little white-haired Polish woman had been in the car that turned down the street at the exact right moment to save me. She hugged me and told me that I was safe, and it was then that I realized that I was still screaming. She sat on the sidewalk with me and then walked me to her car. Cell phones were relatively new. Neither of us had one. She drove me to the police station and stayed with me while I answered questions and made a report. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. My housemate with a car let me borrow it anytime I was going to work after that, and I never walked around downtown after that myself. I had nightmares for a while. I can't help but think of what could have happened to me. I'm a 41-year-old female, and I live in Montana. And a few years ago, I was forced to relocate after my landlord decided to rent to her son. The community I had lived in for 11 and a half years has become incredibly expensive. $787,000 median home price. Unfortunately, I was forced to relocate to another city, and because of the unexpected move and associated costs, I moved in with a roommate. My roommate left to pursue better job prospects about 3 months after I moved in. Our unit was a triplex, so there were 2 gentlemen that inhabited the other units. I was never added to the lease as the property manager required a full deposit, and I was not in a financially healthy spot at the time. I remained in the unit for 1.5 years on my own, paying the rent and utilities. I became very good friends with the man in the unit closest to mine. We'll call the man Devin, a 52-year-old male. Devin was a disabled veteran in recovery. I also am a veteran, so he held a soft spot in my heart. We shared meals, hung out, and discussed all of life's mysteries, and would look out for one another. Devin had gone to treatment for 6 weeks, and I had watched his cat while he was gone. Our friendship developed over the course of 1.5 years. Devin had expressed romantic interest. However, right from the beginning, I clearly informed Devin that I did not share those feelings, and we would never be more than good friends. Devin seemed to be lonely, which made sense. However, I am a person who requires alone time to recharge my batteries. I set strict boundaries for Devin, as he wanted to hang out all of the time. I would catch him walking through the front yard multiple times a day to get the mail, which I believed was to see if I was outside so he could stop to chat. When I would leave in the morning to go to work, Devin was always outside to tell me that I looked nice and to have a good day. I told him that that made me feel uncomfortable, and he should just send a text letting me know if he wanted to hang out and wait for a response. There were a couple of times that I yelled at him for overstepping my boundaries. The first, I had just got home and pulled into my garage. I was on a phone call and had stayed in the car. Devin looked through the garage window to see if I was home. I was annoyed, but didn't really think much of it. The second, I was getting dressed in my room in the summer, so the window was cracked. I felt this was safe as the window was not in a place that anyone should be walking by, as it was on my patio at the back of the home. I caught Devin peeking through. I lost it. I let Devin know under no uncertain terms that his behavior was inappropriate, and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, we would no longer be friends. Last year, while I was still in the home, I had asked Devin to watch my dog for a couple of days so I could go to a family event out of state. Devin was happy to help, and I was very appreciative. Not long after I returned, I started to notice strange things in my home, but I really just thought it was me. For instance, I would be fairly certain that I had locked my door in the morning when I left for work, but when I returned, it would be unlocked. I would be sure I had shut off all the lights, but when I got home in the evening, one would be on. I really just thought it was absent-mindedness. Fast forward a couple of months, and my mom became sick with cancer. My sister watched my dog while I went to tend to my mom. My sister reached out to me and asked if anyone else had a key to my apartment. I let her know that she had the only spare key, but I asked why. Similarly, she had experienced the same issues with lights and locks. I had not shared my concerns with my sister prior to her communicating hers with me, as I really just doubted my own sanity. While I was out of town, I received a text message from Devin asking if I had a potato that he could borrow. I let him know that I was out of state with my mom who was sick. Devin did not reply, which was out of character, but I had noticed a change in Devin's affect. He was more reserved and less friendly towards me. I thought it probably had to do with my firm adherence to my boundaries, which was okay. He didn't have to like them, just respect them. When I got back to town one night, I stayed over at my sister's house after helping her move. As mentioned above, I was struggling financially, so I would carefully budget and plan my weekly meals. The morning before my sister's move, I had placed 3 pieces of bacon into a Ziploc bag to be used later for a BLT. When I returned that following morning, much to my disbelief, there were only 2 pieces of bacon. I held the bag in my hands, knowing that there had been 3. No longer did I doubt myself. I called my sister and let her know that someone had been getting into my house. I always keep the place locked. The only logical thing that could have happened is Devin made a copy of my key when he had watched my dog in the fall. My sister reminded me about the potato text. The potato in the counter basket was gone. I had enough information to be certain that my neighbor had violated my trust and was no friend. However, I still wasn't afraid of him. As I mentioned, he's a disabled vet and was somewhat feeble and sickly. I was not scared of a confrontation. I immediately went to the hardware store and purchased a camera that streams to your phone once the motion detector had been activated. I placed it in the facing the side door where Devin would enter. It also had 2-way audio capability, so my plan was that when Devin decided to enter my home again, I would see it and say over the camera something to the effect of, "Get out of my house, put the key you copied on the counter, and never try to speak with me again or I will contact law enforcement." As I wrote, and Devin knew it. In the evenings, I started placing a jug of cat litter and a kitchen chair in front of the I was at home. And really, he had only taken a piece of uncooked bacon and a potato. Laying on the couch one night watching TV, I thought that I had heard something sliding on the floor in the laundry room where the door was. But I knew that there was no way he would come in while I was home. My cat was running around playing, so I decided that it was probably just her, and I was being paranoid because of all that had happened. The next morning, while changing my laundry, I noticed the litter and chair had been pushed 3 to 4 inches. I checked the sensitivity of the camera and found that I was able to replicate by slowly opening the door. Devin tried to come in while I was home. Why? That morning, I took bear spray into the shower with me while my knees knocked. I was terrified. I felt vulnerable and violated. Devin knew that I knew also now. He knew that I had placed a barrier in front of the door. After that morning, he was never outside in the morning, nor did he walk through the yard to get his mail. I obtained a firearm for protection and did make a police report. The police officer was annoyed with me, as I did not want to approach Devin, as all Devin would need to do was report me to the property manager and I would be homeless. I am grateful that whatever he was up to was apparently thwarted. The fact that he tried to come in while he knew that I was home gives me the heebie-jeebies. I wonder if he went through my underwear, watched me while I slept, etc. Since then, my situation has greatly improved. I ended up moving out shortly after to take care of my mom. I got my own place again a few months ago. I will never put my trust in another neighbor for pet or house setting ever again. It still blows my mind that I had some jerk stealing from me and likely stalking me. This story just solidifies that one should always trust their gut. There were so many times that a red flag was screaming, and I just thought that I was being crazy. This is not my story, rather my mom's from the late 80s. This will be a short one, but after all these years, I still think about it. My mom was spending an ordinary night in her apartment. She had a miniature dachshund named Rocky, whom was her only roommate. For context, my mom is a really pretty blonde. She was frequently complimented on her looks, and still is. She had recently rented this place to escape a soured relationship, a fresh start if you will. Getting ready to tuck in for the evening, she started to the front door to let Rocky outside to use the bathroom. Something came over her to look outside first. Just that split second is all she needed to listen to her intuition and take a peek out the window. As she looked outside, she saw a man standing at her door, staring directly at her front door. No one had knocked or made any sounds. He was just standing there, as if he was waiting for her to open the door for the very reason she intended. My mom immediately called the police, and when officers arrived, the man had vanished. She never got a great look at him since it was dark. Other than acting extremely suspicious and creepy, there was nothing the cops could really do, other than to keep an eye on the place and look out for this man. My mom spent the rest of the evening with one of her girlfriends, who came over to stay the night with her. Not exactly a terrifying story, but one that I remember strongly of her telling me when I was in my 20s. I shudder to think what could have or would have happened if she opened that door. I got the sense that this person knew my mom lived alone. Who knows? Maybe it was someone at the wrong door, or someone just playing a prank that they never owned up to. My mom has always been tough as nails. Maybe that also goes hand in hand with being smart and trusting your instincts. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.